your local radio station.
Llanelli Talk Radio.
Welcome along to Llanelli Talk Radio's podcast. We are getting closer and closer to the Senedd Elections on the 6th of May. We've had a number of polls over recent months, putting various parties in the lead. Labour predominantly have been there at number one. A recent poll put Labour as sort of falling down the listing, really, losing a considerable number of seats, making it one of the closest Senedd elections in history, 20 years. But the latest poll actually puts Labour way ahead again. What are the connotations for that? Another Labour government. 20 years of Labour in Wales, no change at all. Or could it be a coalition with Plaid Cymru, with Adam Price as the Deputy First Minister? To answer these questions, we have, as always, our political analyst, Gwynoro Jones, in the studio. Croeso, Gwynoro. You're listening to the Llanelli Online podcast. Gwynoro Jones, welcome along to the studio. Good to have you as usual.
Yeah, thanks. Fine.
Let's look at some of these polls and these predictions that we have. And we should point out that they are only predictions, only polls, and only a certain percentage of the population take part in these. Sometimes a couple of thousand, sometimes maybe, 5,000, 10,000. It depends on who's conducting the polls. How accurate do you think they are?
Well, the polls generally, people, by the way, always say that. I noticed that all over the years. There's only 1,000 people asked, or only 2,000 people, and I've never been asked in any opinion poll. Opinion polls generally are not far off the mark. They're not supposed to be accurate, and sometimes they're not a forecast of what's going to happen. That's how the mood is when they were questioned. Those 1,000 people. I was involved with market research in my first job with Ina Needle-Bearing, so I know a fair bit about market research. These samples are closely put together as a representative sample of the population as a whole. And they're not far off the mark in that respect. But every poll has plus or minus 3% as a margin. In other words, if you have 33% voting Labour in any poll, it could be 36 or it could be 30 and so on for other parties. So it is not an accurate predictor, but it's a very good guide.
Looking at those results, should they be sort of upheld then, that Labour get in, or without the majority then, that they need somebody to come into coalition? We've looked at some of the polls and, not surprisingly, probably for you, is that about 28 to 30% of people are voting for independence for Wales. And yet, Adam Price is in third place behind the Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davies, in the popularity contest, really, for who would make the best First Minister. And they stand to be in third place for the number of seats in the Senedd. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, it's not automatic that they're going to be third in the seats as compared to the Tories. It's going to be a close run thing. Who's going to be second between Plaid and the Conservatives? Oh, I say that. Who knows? The Tories could outperform everybody for the first time in a long time. But who knows? Politics is funny. Well, which one is the preference for Prime Minister or the most popular, tends to go with how you feel about politics. If Labour are getting 30-odd%, Drakeford has a higher standing than Andrew or Adam. So I'm not surprised by that. I think I've said before, the big surprise for me is that Plaid Cymru are not performing up to the level that the polls show of support for independence. The support for independence is invariably much higher than the vote for people who are going to vote for Plaid Cymru. Now, that is an issue for Plaid Cymru to sort out. It is a strategic issue and it's not working. So they need to look at that because it is a problem, clearly.
It may become an issue for any subsequent government, the Labour government, because if the people's will, the power and so on, aims that way, is directed that way, then maybe they will go down the road of referendum. Anyway, that's for the future. Let's just look at the polls. You said there now, you weren't quite confident that that's the way it would fall or that Plaid Cymru would be third. But again, when we look at the regional list, Plaid Cymru are third. The prediction in the polls are that they are behind the Conservatives.
Yeah, as I said, there's been about 2 or 3 polls in recent times which have given different results. As we've indicated, polls can be like that. The one now says that Labour has made a strong comeback. The Tories are second, Plaid Cymru are third. The one before said the reverse. Labour were in trouble. They were going to lose 7 or 8 seats, and Plaid was second, and the Tories third. So we're in that ball game at the moment. There's still 2 weeks to go. It's only a third of the way through. It's an open season, and these polls will get closer and closer to the decision as time goes on. So I wouldn't necessarily be over-worried if Plaid are third at the moment. I think there's a bigger issue for Plaid is that they're not performing up to the percentage of people who believe in independence for Wales. They're not reaching that level. That is the question for them.
There is another crucial element here in that, okay, these polls, one would expect, would take a cross-section of society, maybe a certain age group or whatever. Are you confident maybe that would include an element of 16-year-olds, this new generation who are going to be able to vote? And do you think that we are going to see the polls really being proven wrong in a way when if the 16-year-olds come out en masse, and if they do get interested in politics, if they do come out, there's a high turnout of young people voting, do you think that will be the surprise card that will propel either one of those parties to a far greater number of seats?
Well, traditionally, the young vote should favour Plaid Cymru in this day and age. That is the general feeling. But of course, there are many issues here. How many of the young people have actually registered? Have they all registered? How many will turn out to vote? How committed will they be? So there are variants there. This election is going to be a funny election. It's in the middle of COVID. Campaigning has been restricted. What will the turnout be? Sadly, turnout for Senedd Elections and previously Assembly have not been all that good. Quite unacceptable in my terms that only about half the people, if that, of the Welsh people bother to vote in their own assembly. Is it going to be a higher turnout or a lower turnout? So that is one issue. So it's a difficult election to predict, and maybe the polls could get it wrong. Who knows? It's difficult. A lot of it depends on turnout, you see, and because then the apportions between the parties will vary depending on turnout. Let's see what happens. Not going to be an easy one to call, I think.
The connotations for a result that puts Labour without the majority are quite wide-reaching, really. That obviously Labour could form a coalition with Plaid Cymru, could form a coalition with the Conservatives. Conversely, Conservatives could form a coalition with Plaid and so on. And then there comes a point where some of the minor parties will make a big difference in a coalition should some of the parties decide, to go down that route. Adam Price has ruled this out, categorically. I would imagine R.T. Davis would rule it out. Mark Drake would rule it out. Jane Dodds certainly ruled it out. Said, I will never, ever, go into coalition with Conservatives or abolish or anyone else. But the reality is for them is that they will possibly have to do that.
Well, the reality of any election has to be that there's the result. It's on the table. What do we do? So whatever they say beforehand is immaterial. You understand why they're saying it, because if you say you're going to be in coalition with someone, then you're either going to upset a chunk of your party that doesn't support the other party you're going into coalition with, and they're not happy. So everybody is hedging their bets and playing it safe and close to their chest. But remember, we've had coalition governments effectively the last 5 Senedd elections. The only clear-cut Labour victory was the first one in 1999. Since then, there's been a coalition with the Lib Dems, there's been a coalition with Plaid, and the last one, of course, was Kirsty Williams and David Ellis-Thomas went into their personal coalitions with Gwynoro Jones and Mark Drakeford. So we're used to coalitions. The biggest attempt at a non-Labour coalition was in 2007, of course, when it was a close-run thing that the Conservatives, Plaid and the Lib Dems would form a government of its own. Now, that almost happened within a whisker, that almost happened. I don't think we're in that situation again, because what happened then was, I understand, even though there were people in favour of it, Leanne Wood wasn't. I think the Liberal Democrats, even though they were moving towards that coalition, they had cold feet at the very last moment. So, I don't know. It's difficult to say. But I think my hunch is Wales needs a shake-up. Wales needs... We've spoken before in an earlier podcast about the new politics. I think Wales does need new politics. Same old does no good. But whether this is the time it's going to happen, I can't tell you that yet.
We, you take a drive around and you go down through Llanelli and you can see, at the Westminster elections and even now at the Senedd, Lee Waters, the boards are up, the windows are posted. It's a working class traditional Labour town. Gwendraeth Valley, you go through Pontiets, Pontyberem and Ammanford and so on. You can see the Plaid Cymru dominance there. Take a drive up towards Mid Wales, Ceredigion, well, you'd be hard pushed to see anything other than Ellen Jones posters and David Llewellyn placards and so on. I guess what you're saying there is the no change and same old. But for those particular communities, those unique sort of rural locations such as Ceredigion, all that matters to them is that they have a Plaid Cymru representative. And Ellen Jones she's on a safe seat, she's on a very good wage. Do you think that's how it is? Do you think that people take the national picture and are more concerned with that? Or do you think they're just happy to say, locally, we want this and that's what we're going to have?
I don't think local politics is as important as it should be for the Senedd elections. I think general politics, even general UK politics, affects the voting in the Senedd. Hence the Tories are doing very, very well in the polls at the moment. I would much rather to have seen a situation where the local candidates, they have the predominance as opposed to parties. But as we know, parties predominant. I have always taken the view that parties are too important in politics, and to weaken parties is a good plus. But then I'm an odd one out there, I suppose, in many, many ways. No. What you have is pockets of Wales that are traditionally Labour, traditionally Plaid, one or two, used to be more, Liberal Democrats, chunks of Tory areas. That's how it is. And that's how it's been for generations. How we change that, I do not know. But the local candidate plays a part, but not as big a part as we think. I used to remember when I was in politics back in the 60s, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, that an individual candidate was worth 1,000 votes as a person. Not more than that, around 1,000. So therefore, yes, party politics plays the main part.
Okay, so we're looking at some of the... Let's just look at a couple of the ones that are going to be quite challenging, the seats. We're looking at, in Llanelli, for instance, it's a very slim majority that Lee Waters has last election. And the forecast is that Helen Mary Jones may just steal this. And then on the Gower, we've got Rebecca Evans. And forgive me, I'm just trying to find the Miles Langston of the Conservatives.
That's right.
Two ones to watch, and we will be reporting on the night, hopefully, with links to some of these people. Those are going to be the big seats to watch, aren't they?
Well, there are, yes, those in our area here. Yes, that's true. But across Wales, there are about 8 seats that are going to be very interesting. Remember, in the 2019 general election, the Conservatives did very, very well in Wales. And they won Anglesey, they won Wrexham, they won Bridgend as examples. Now, is that trend going to happen again for the Senedd elections? Is Anglesey going to be Conservative or for Reen? Is Gower going to go Conservative? It's an unknown question. When you talk of Llanelli is a peculiar situation, and it's very odd, really. It's hard to believe that you are talking of Llanelli being very, very marginal, an old Labour seat like that, but it has arrived at that situation now. And is Helen Mary in with a chance? Well, I think she is. She's had 1 or 2 bad publicity issues in recent times. So has Lee, of course. During the COVID guidance issues. I don't know. Anything will happen. As I said earlier, it's a peculiar election. What will turn out be? The postal vote will be high across Wales. What's going to be the implication of that? Which party will benefit most from the postal votes? These are unknowables at the moment, but there are certainly 6 to 8 seats in Wales worth looking at. Anglesey, Wrexham, Bridgend, Gower, Llanelli, Monmouth, of course, because in Monmouth the sitting Tory AM was ditched, wasn't he? Nick Ramsey, yeah? But he's standing as an independent against the Conservative. Now, could Labour win in Monmouth? Highly possible if the independent Ramsey and the Conservatives split the right-wing vote.
Well, that's my next question there. With the phone ringing, it doesn't matter. My next question to you really is that, looking at the Gower, I mean, there are 7 candidates there. 2 realistically with a chance, Miles Langston and Rebecca Evans. The rest, Plaid Cymru, Gwlad, Reform, Green Party, Liberal Democrats. Do you think, we talked about new politics, do you think that in those situations that those people should give way, much like, when the Speaker is on the floor in Parliament, that they should give way and withdraw and not risk losing their deposit and so on, when the reality is these 2 parties are massive and they cannot compete, but they will take away the chances of one or other winning because of that sort of minimal amount of vote that they are stealing away.
Politics is a funny game, Alan. If you are in politics, one thing for sure, you've got to be an optimist. You don't get anywhere if you don't believe in your cause, and if you don't believe, well, I'm going to do fairly well. Not necessarily win, do fairly well. So obviously, the Lib Dems in Gower, Gwlad, Propel, Reform UK, in many ways, they're new kids on the block, those last 3. They've got to put their name forward. If you want to make an advance in politics, you've got to take it one step at a time. So no, they shouldn't stand down. If you're talking of standing down, I'm far more interested in a bigger picture when you come to the next general election. I think the parties of the centre-left need to get together. I mean Labour, the Liberal Democrats and Plaid Cymru, in order to counteract the threat to Wales via Westminster in the attempt to undermine democracy. But now I'm talking progressive alliance, progressive politics. But, of course, that also is not easily accepted. Every party, why should Labour give in a seat and let Plaid stand instead? Even though they think that would be a better chance. They don't do it. People just don't do these things. No, I have no problem with parties standing, fighting their corner, stating their case. Otherwise, how do you advance? Otherwise, if none of that had happened, we would have had Labour and Tory since 1910, 1918, or whatever. Or before that, you would have had Conservative and Liberal before the Labour Party came into being. There's got to be an advancement, hasn't there? No, I've got no problem with that. What is at issue is, of course, will they lose their deposits? What will be the financial impact upon them? Morale, the future. Now, that's a different issue.
Your local radio station.
Llanelli Talk Radio.
You've been listening to the Llanelli Talk Radio podcast with myself, Alan Evans, and Gwynoro Jones. We hope you've enjoyed listening in to our sort of political commentary, political analysis as the Senedd elections fast approach. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Your suggestions, your questions for Llanelli Talk Radio. Email editor@llanellionline.news. Will the politicians honour the pledges, the contracts with the people of Wales? You decide who governs Wales at the Senedd elections on May the 6th. We would love to hear from you. Listen in to our next podcast, which looks in depth at the manifestos of the various political parties. For now, this is me, Alan Evans, saying goodbye. Hwyl fawr, diolch yn fawr i chi gyd.